Alright, what I'm going to do here is give you a second example or another example of a quadratic equation where we're looking at a word problem. So in this example, our word problem is that a square vegetable garden, so here's our square vegetable garden, there it is, in a small backyard, has a side length which is x meters. Now they don't know what the side length is, this is the thing that we've got to solve. We do know, however, that the area of our vegetable garden in this problem is 14 meters squared. Now we have to write an equation first of all to represent this information. Now we know that the area of a square, because this is a square vegetable garden, we know that the area of a square is equal to the side length squared. Now in this case we know what the area is, so it's 14. We also know what the s is, okay, the side length, but it's a different pronumeral. We've called it x. So in this case, our area is equal to x squared. S squared, our x. And so when we solve our quadratic equation, what we're going to end up with is x squared is equal to 14. Remember our square root trick? And so the inverse of squaring is to take the square root, but we've got to remember that there's a plus and a minus value. So when we take the square root, I'm just going to switch sides of the equation. The square root of x squared is going to be equal to the square root of 14. I've taken the square root of both sides. On the left-hand side, we're going to have x becomes equal to plus and minus the square root of 14. You can then take your calculator and work out what the square root of 14 is. So you would turn your calculator on and you'd write 14 and push the square root button and write 14, and you end up with 3.741657387. Now remember that traditionally here we round to 2 decimal places, and you've got to remember that this is we've got to make an answer that makes sense. So x is going to be equal to plus or minus, the answer is going to be in meters, 3.74 meters. Now you've got to look at that answer and say, okay, well, does that answer make sense? Sometimes in a quadratic equation, even though you've solved the quadratic equation, the answer isn't going to make sense, because this side length here can't be minus 3.74 meters. That doesn't exist in the real world. We don't have gardens that have negative side length values. And so when we look at our final answer, sometimes even though you're getting 2 solutions for your quadratic equation, you've got to consider the units and whether or not the negative value actually makes sense. In many quadratic equations, the answer has to be just the positive value. And so in this case, we know that it can't be a negative value. So we can say the garden side length is 3.74 meters. We can discard the second answer because we consider the answer, we decide whether or not it makes sense. And negative 3.74 meters doesn't exist in garden side lengths, and so therefore we can discard the second answer, know that it doesn't make sense, and have our final answer there that does make sense.